now time for the Grobstein and Schuster Express on 1252 Sports Chicago. All aboard! And now, here are your hosts, Les Grobstein and David Schuster.
And welcome into the latest edition of the Grobstein Schuster Express. I'm David Schuster, joined as always by my longtime friend and compadre, Les Grobstein, of course, the overnight host on WSCR Radio, The Score. And in just a little bit, both Les and I will be joined by another good friend of ours, Bruce Miles, a longtime fellow reporter who, as his Twitter account says, is semi-retired, but he's still currently working. He's putting his many thoughts on paper on his very successful blog right out of the press box, and you can follow Bruce on Twitter at Bruce Miles 2112. Looking forward to talking to Bruce. A lot of baseball to talk about. Let's start right there. The White Sox, we talk about the Grobstein Schuster Express, but the White Sox Express continues on. They're a season high now, 20 games over 500. A magnificent ball game for the fans today. And you know what, Les? A magnificent game for the reporters that were there because it was quick. When you only allow one hit, that's like, that's heaven.
It was magnificent for you because we know what you think of long games. You hate them, and you always have. Any long games, I call them David Schuster, specials, something along those lines. Carlos Rodon, he just shut the Astros down. The Astros looked great on Friday, and they continued their dominance over the Sox. The Sox bounced back against the last couple of days. Does that mean anything if they meet each other in the playoffs? Probably not. The only thing that might matter is whoever gets home field advantage if they do meet. But the Stros, they looked blah the last couple of days, and that was Sox pitching that had a lot to do with it.
100% correct on that. I mean, Giolito was magnificent yesterday. He only allowed 3 hits and going the distance. I'm sure if, Rodon needed to go the distance today, he might have been able to do that. But as it is, they turned it over in the 8th inning to Michael Kopech. I like the way the White Sox are handling Kopech. Let's face it, he's going to be a starter in that rotation for years to come down the road. But for right now, Tony La Russa and the Sox hierarchy are finding their spots to use him. I think as the season gets deeper and maybe into the playoffs, he'll become even more of a weapon for them. But right now, it's all about pitching, Les. And the White Sox, I think, from 1 through 5, I think they have the best overall starting staff in the major leagues. They have no weaknesses. Now, every now and then, Dylan Cease might, he gets a little rattled like he did in Friday night's game and starts getting a little wild. But, Dallas Keuchel, who was the frontline pitcher last year, he's like one of the weak links. I mean, Lance Lynn has been magnificent. We'll talk about his contract extension in just a moment. Carlos Rodon is the comeback player of the year because he's coming back from injuries, of course. Unless I pose it to you, and we've asked this a couple of times, let's just say the season were to end right now. Who's your game 1 pitcher for the Southsiders?
Rodon right now.
Okay.
I would pick Rodon, period, the way he's going.
That's really interesting. And the reason I say it still might be Lance Lynn, and let's face it, we still have another 7.
If you want a veteran, it's going to be Lynn, and maybe La Russa wants to go with a bit more of a veteran. And if that's the case, if that's your key, it's going to be Lance Lynn. My option is I would go with Rodon first and Lynn second. Okay.
The only reason I think as of right now, and things can change, I grant that, like I said, 75 games still to go, that I would go with Lynn is Lynn is the veteran, as you alluded to. Lynn, probably has a little bit more of the confidence of his manager, and I think that's why he got this contract extension as well. And here's the key thing. Rodon, again, coming back from injuries the last couple of years, when we get later into the season, at least I do, I worry a little bit how strong his arm's going to be. He was still throwing near 100 again today, but with, let's say, throwing another 75 or 100 innings before the season's over, I worry just a little bit how strong that arm is going to be in the postseason.
That's why teams like Boston, Houston, and Oakland are teams you have to worry about. This division's done. It's over. It's theirs not to lose. I mean, they would have to be absolutely terrible to lose this division. Cleveland did win today. Whoopee for them. They beat Oakland, a good team, 4-2. Oakland is still battling with Houston for that AL West title. But right now, the Sox are this division's done. Just like Milwaukee's getting close to getting that National League Central wrapped up. And as far as the Cubs, I don't care what anybody says; they're about done. I know we're going to get to them in a minute, but they should have lost 2 out of 3 to Arizona. They only lost 1 out of 3 because the D-backs handed them that game on Saturday.
Yeah. All right. One more note on the White Sox before we get to the Cubs. The White Sox have been talking to a lot of teams. It sounds like they had a deal with Arizona for their second baseman, but that fell apart at the last minute. And when Bob Nightingale says anything about the White Sox, it's gospel because he's tied into certain members of the White Sox front office. So I believe that was going to happen, but it didn't because of a few things. But the White Sox still need another bullpen arm. I don't think there's any question. They probably need a veteran catcher, at least for the remainder of the season, because you don't know if Grandal is going to come back. And if it does, what kind of health he will be. And again, if your strength of your team is your starting and overall staff, I don't think you want to go into the postseason potentially with a couple of young catchers on your roster. So I still think they're going to make a couple of moves before the deadline, the end of the month.
Probably right. I don't disagree with anything you said. I do know that Grandal could be back in early September. If he does, then that'll be a big bonus for them.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the other side of town. As you alluded to, the Cubs did take 2 out of 3 against Arizona. They lost today's game 6-4. For what it's worth, they're 9 games out in the Central. Milwaukee is starting to pull back away. I think they have a 7-game lead over Cincinnati. For what it's worth, again, the Cubs are 7.5 games out of the wild card. They've already shown their cards less. They traded Jack Peterson for next to nothing. It's just what is the next domino that's going to fall? Is it going to be Rizzo? And I didn't think so because of his bad back, but they picked up for what little it's worth a couple of first basemen over the last couple of days. I don't know why. Is it going to be Bryant? Is it going to be Baez? Is it going to be Contreras? Who's the next domino to fall for the Cubs?
The pitcher or the first baseman, I should say, they picked up is Frank Swindell. They got him from the Oakland A's. I don't know what kind of effect. He is being assigned immediately to AAA Iowa. Now, as far as the season goes, I don't know if they're really going to start dumping people. They got rid of, like you said, Jack Peterson. When they unload the rest that they plan to do, I'll believe it when I see it. Right now, I still think maybe they're just talking. It's just speech. But they're claiming that, well, we're still in it. We can get back. No, you can't get back into it. I don't care what Baez said. I don't care what Contreras said or Rizzo or anybody else. They're done.
All right. Well, we're going to ask Bruce this one when he comes up in just a couple of minutes here. But I'm going to tell you, Les, if Jed Hoyer does not make some major moves, and what I mean by major moves of clearing out some of that salary that his owner definitely does not want to have on the books going forward, then something is really wrong. And then I think his job is in jeopardy. And we forgot to mention Craig Kimbrell. I just can't believe that Chris Bryant is going to be a Cub after 2 weeks from today. I think Baez will probably be around. By the way, I was told there was some reports. I think John, I'm spacing out right now. I'm spacing out who the national reporter is.
Just say John Doe and go from there.
Yeah, John, the national writer. I'm spacing out right now. Anyway, that there was some reports that the Cubs were working on some long-term deals potentially with both Baez and Rizzo. I was told by a source that is absolutely not true. So we'll find out very shortly over the next couple of weeks. But again, I cannot see Chris Bryant or Craig Kimbrell. Neither one should be on this roster 2 weeks from today. They both should be traded. It's John Heyman. Thank you very much, Little Yumper, for reminding me. I just spaced out.
MLB.com is one of his affiliations.
Say that again, Les?
It said one of John Heyman's affiliations is MLB.com.
Right. And Heyman is obviously a very well-connected writer, but I was told that is not true. The Cubs are not talking long-term deals with either of those players. Anyway, with that in mind, we're talking about the Cubs. We're talking about the White Sox. Let's bring in our good friend, Les. Bruce Miles, of course, longtime writer for the Daily Herald. Sat in the press box, went through all the rain delays with myself, commiserated with me. I took the bullet for everybody else. I was glad to do that. But Bruce, how you doing? Welcome to our little podcast.
Well, thank you. You know what? You were the first person I thought of today when the White Sox game took only 2 hours and 28 minutes. Was getting ready for dinner here, and I thought, boy, Shu would have loved that, and wouldn't we all? But the fans don't care about media complaints about how long the games take, so I kind of quit doing that a while ago. But I'll tell you, when you get one of those games, and all of us have been around a long time, like you said earlier, it's a throwback, it's old school, and when you get a guy dealing like Rodon was today, to me, that's how baseball should be played.
Bruce, we're going to talk about the Cubs and the White Sox, but right out of the gate here, tell us about your blog that you've been writing right out of the press box. You've been delving pretty deep into some really good subjects. Why don't you give us a little bit further background?
Yeah, once I retired, or semi-retired, as you put it, after the 2019 baseball season, took a little bit easy. I did some freelance work for places like my alma mater, Loyola Chicago, for the Daily Herald, for The Athletic, and for a wonderful women's sports group called Athletes Unlimited, which plays softball here in Rosemont, and will do so again in August. But I thought that should be a place for me to get some thoughts out. One of the things I really liked doing as a newspaper reporter was interacting with the fans, and I thought if I had any success at all, it was because of that. I always wrote for the writers, or for the readers. I never wrote to impress other writers. I never wrote to please editors. So I wanted to keep that going a little bit. So it's on brucemiles.net. I call it Write, W-R-I-T-E, out of the press box, because that's what I'm doing. I'm writing outside of the press box, and it's whimsical, it's occasional. It might be every day, it might be every week, but we'll talk some sports, we'll talk some music, we'll talk some red wine maybe, we'll talk some travel, but it's just something kind of for me to exercise the craft. I still like writing, I still like interacting with the fan, and I still like, delving into some subjects. I did a story a week or so ago on the blog about past Cubs managers that I've covered, and really had some fun with that. When, like I always say, and you guys know this too, if you're in this town and you have covered Dusty Baker, Lou Piniella, and Joe Madden, you've gone to media heaven.
No question about that. And what I have to say is this too. And when I talk about a beat writer or a columnist, with a lot of my callers that I get on the Score and that I used to get in the past and all, I keep trying to explain there's a big difference. People think that you guys, when you're a columnist and when you're a beat writer, are one and the same. That's absolutely not true. If you are, and correct me if you.
I think Les is having a little bit of technical difficulty, so Bruce and I will pick it up for just a second. And I think where he was going was the difference between a columnist and a beat writer. Let's face it, the beat writer is there every minute of every day. The columnist is there, I'll just say, periodically. So obviously there's a big difference, Bruce.
Oh, there is. And the beat writer is more of the nuts and bolts person who provides the reader with information, tries to get everything he or she can into that game story, into that notebook. The notebooks are so important every day, with trade information, with lineup changes, with injuries, with who's mad at who. Some of the line has been blurred in recent years because editors have wanted their beat writers to inject more opinion and more analysis and more thought into it. So that line has been blurred a little bit. And frankly, you can run into a little problem with that if you're constantly ripping whoever you're covering every day. You have to face them every day. And I never had any problem with that. I had a Cubs coach once tell me, we might not always agree with what you've written, but we'll always talk with you because you were fair. So to me, that was a great compliment. But yeah, in general, beat writers stick to the reporting, columnists stick to the opinion. The beat writers are there every day. And, the columnists, might see them once a month, whatever.
It's funny, Bruce, because I wrote down on my piece of paper some of the things to talk to you about, and that one of them was Cubs managers, and I agree with you. And not only was it on the north side of town, but at the same time, Ozzie Guillen was on the south side. So if you were a reporter, boy, you had your notebook filled and then some. Now, a lot of it was on the blue side, if you will, especially with Ozzie Guillen, but it was always interesting. But you're right. I mean, the three Cub managers that you mentioned, they were fun to be around. They were pretty affable overall, no question about that. But there were a couple of other goofballs that were, both our tenures on the north side of town, and I'm sure that you could probably expound a little bit on those as well.
I'm back. I think I'm back.
Yes, you are back, Les. And in the meantime, we just asked Bruce to talk about some of the Cub managers we talked about some of the positive ones, but there was some oddball Cub managers over the years.
Like Herman Franks. Herman Franks was he was bad. I mean, he took a team and he managed them pretty well and stuff, but he was a reporter's nightmare. He was miserable.
Yeah, he was a little bit before my time. I came in with, and very fortunately, I must say, with Jim Riggleman, was my first manager as a beat writer. Jim was a lot like
one of the best.
A lot like Joe Madden in that he treated everybody with respect. Jim or Joe, neither one of those guys ever treated a reporter's question with disdain. Even if he thought it was a dumb question, he always explained, what he was trying to do in a given situation. Yeah, there were a lot of guys in between. It was unfortunate. I think a local guy named Mike Quaddy was put into a situation when the Cubs weren't really sure of what they were doing. Mike is the only manager I think that ever argued a rain delay. There was one night where it was raining and the umpires called for the tarp, and Mike was arguing in the pouring rain with the umpire about why are you putting the tarp down? And I'm like, well, because it's raining. So. And so, there were some others too. I think that we've had big name managers here: the Baylors, the Bakers, the Pinellas, the Maddens, and then there were some that were in rebuilding situations like Dale Swaim, a real good hitting coach who found himself with terrible teams in 2012, 2013, and he made the mistake of insinuating maybe that Starlin Castro and Anthony Rizzo were going to be sent to the minor leagues in 2013. That sealed his fate. The Cubs sent an intermediary to Cincinnati on the next trip after Milwaukee, and Theo Epstein kept saying no alarm bells, but boy, those bells were ringing. So over the years, you get the big names and you get the guys who were there in unfortunate situations trying to fill gaps. But that's the only job I think in America where you have to deal with the media twice a day, a baseball manager.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, Bruce, you mentioned Theo, and I wanted to talk to you about this as well. We're going to get into the current club, but let's face it, Theo Epstein will always be revered here in Chicago by Cub fans because he got them a championship, after the 108 years. However, I'm not really sure he did a good job on the back end of that. And, here are the Cubs right now with all those contracts that they're probably going to try and get out from under by ownership's decree. So I'm just wondering, do you think on the back side of those championships that Theo, along with Jed, did not do what they needed to do to keep them at the level that they needed to challenge for a title each and every year going forward?
Well, that's a very good question. And let's not forget Jason McLeod, who was the guy in charge of drafting, who never drafted any impact pitchers with the Cubs. They went for position players early on. Almora, Bryant, Schwarber, Happ, guys like that. McLeod never drafted any impact pitchers. So you have to look at that situation. And one of the things that I always harped on the last couple of years that Joe Madden was there, that he was the only guy that never got a contract extension in that management group. Theo got extended, Jed Hoyer got extended, Jason McLeod got extended, and they kind of blamed Joe at the end for that. Now, listen, they win the World Series in 2016. 2017, they don't. Okay, it's hard to repeat. So they lose to the Dodgers after beating the Nationals, after the Nationals kind of gifted them that series. But then the offense kind of took a powder. 2018, 2019, 2020, the same old story, same old song and dance with that offense. So I think one of the things is to be a good baseball management person, you have to self-scout well. A lot of people accuse Jim Hendry, the previous regime, of not being able to do that. Well, remember Joe kept saying, well, look at Baez, look at Bryant, look at all these guys. Look at them in 3 or 4 years from now. They're going to be, well, no, they weren't great. These guys kind of hit a plateau. And I think that was really the root of the problem, not drafting pitchers. And these guys kind of never really hit that next level that the Cubs thought they would hit.
Well, when you talk about Baez and Contreras, and again, they're the last two people from the Hendry regime. Hendry did a good job. His biggest problem was after the 2008 season, when he got rid of a lot of key players and he brought in Milton Bradley when he could have had a couple of decent outfielders and all the rest of that. And I think that was pretty much the end of the run that he had there. And then once the team got sold by Tribune Company to Ricketts, that was going to be the end of Hendry.
Well, yeah, I think the biggest unfortunate thing about that whole thing was for years and years, Jim kind of never looked at the advanced metrics, sabermetrics. So then they went out after 2008 and got Milton Bradley. Jim always talked about character this, character that. When they got Bradley, they cited all of these metrics, on-base percentages and that. And what ended up killing them? Character. It was the cruelest of cruel ironies. They got rid of Mark DeRosa to make sure that they could get Bradley.
That was the first mistake. That was the first big mistake, getting rid of him on New Year's Eve. I'll never forget that.
Oh, yeah. I was downtown with my family, going to get set to go out and have a nice dinner and so forth. And that trade kind of interrupted it. They brought in Aaron Miles, who was a disaster. Bradley was an absolute disaster in the clubhouse and on the field. So, yeah, that was the beginning of the end for Jim Hendry. It was unfortunate because he did a lot of good things like bringing in Derek Lee, Aramis Ramirez, Greg Maddux. Nomar was the right move at the right time. Rich Harden, a lot of good moves, Kenny Lofton, so forth and so on. But yeah, that was the beginning of the end. And once the new management team or the ownership took over, all bets were off.
And you know what, Bruce? I mean, Jim Hendry did a lot of great things and a lot of great moves. I think one of the best moves he ever made is at the winter meetings, he would buy drinks for the reporters. That was a really big, that was a big thing. I want to talk about, a thing that you started talking about, Bruce. The offense has failed for 3+ years. I mean, it's a broken record. It's the same thing for the most part this year. They challenged for a while, but that was, pie in the sky. Anthony Rizzo led off today's game. I mean, they have not solved the leadoff hitter during this regime for 4 straight years. I'm very old-fashioned. I think if you have a leadoff hitter who can get on base, the old thing with Dexter Fowler, he go, we go, you go, whatever the go was. And they have never figured that out. And until they do, Bruce, I'm not so sure that lineup is ever going to do anything.
And here's the other thing along with that, David. They got lucky because Dexter Fowler literally, figuratively, parachuted into spring training in February of 2016 after the 15 season. He was all signed, sealed, and delivered to go to Baltimore. That deal fell through. He came back. Without him, they probably don't win in 16. And since then, it's been one parade after the other. The other irony or whatever you want to call it, coincidence, Kyle Schwarber. They tried him there. Madden got blamed for, quote-unquote, ruining Kyle Schwarber. Well, this year, Davey Martinez put Schwarber back into the leadoff spot. He took off before he had the hamstring injury, but Schwarber was a revelation this year and a guy they let go for nothing because they didn't want to tender him a contract. So, yeah, you're right. Since Dexter Fowler, you can probably count the 20, 25 guys they've tried there, and it's not worked, and the offense has been stalled since then.
And when they had guys like Rizzo and Schwarber lead off certain games with home runs, their response was, oh, see, we're doing the right thing. No, you weren't doing the right thing. That was short-lived. It was temporary. And lately they've even tried doing it with Jock Peterson. That worked out so well. They dumped him. It was the first player they unloaded.
Yeah, and then, you're going to see more of it like you guys alluded to in your chat to start the program here. I just think it's going to be a feeding frenzy the rest of this month. In a lot of ways, it's too bad. It shouldn't come to this.
No, it shouldn't, but it likely will, Bruce, because, I do believe all ownership wants to win, the Ricketts included. I think they reap the benefits of winning, and winning, probably means more money in the till, going forward. However, right now, it sure seems like they're more interested in the bottom line than getting to that point of winning again. And they're going to dump contracts. I don't think there's any question about it. Kimbrel will be gone in the next 2 weeks. I fervently believe that Bryant will be gone. They have to keep somebody. No one's going to take Rizzo off their hands because of his bad back. And he's not going to get the contract that he hopes to because of that bad back. And then my estimation is I think they end up signing Baez. He might not be as much money as he wants because they're going to have somebody for the masses to still come out and cheer for it. That's the way I look at what's going to happen here over the next few weeks to begin with.
And I think that what the thing is that has Cubs fans so cynical is the Yu Darvish trade. Yep. Okay, if you want to dump salary and get rid of Yu Darvish, we'll get something. The guys they got for him are barely old enough to shave, had barely played professional baseball, if at all. So that's the thing I think that has Cubs fans really worried about this in that, okay, do we really have to go through this rebuild again in the by far the biggest market team in the NL Central? And if so, what are we going to get back? They got good return when they traded the guys like Samardzija and Jason Hamill and all those guys and Scott Feldman earlier on. But, what are they going to get now? Do you trust Jed Hoyer to do this? And is it going to be more than just salary dumps?
I was going to say, let's talk about Jake Arrieta. Did they get lucky when he came here from Baltimore and became unhittable for a while? They don't get into the postseason in 2015, other than that wild card game that he threw in Pittsburgh, and I don't think the Pirates ever responded from that. And not only that situation, but then they decided to take a flyer on bringing Jake back. Great guy. I'm not enjoying saying that, but right now he can't get anybody out, and he's not hurt. They're just keeping him out of the rotation because they're afraid to use him because they know he's going to get his butt kicked.
Yeah, I think there's some credit where credit is due there. They got both Jake Arrieta and Pedro Strop, who a lot of people like to pick on over the years, but who history will show one of the most effective relievers in Cubs history and one of the best clubhouse guys. You guys know that as well. Ever, always a smile on his face. Always there, accountable with the media in good times and in bad. But I think with Arrieta, they might have found some things early that maybe where he stagnated a little bit in Baltimore. They found a few things with his delivery. If you remember, he spent time in Iowa before he came up really in that year that they got him. It took him a little bit a while to get going, but I think there's some credit where it's due there. But now, it's a different Jake Arrieta. There's a lot of miles on that arm, and like you guys said, great guy. But I think the end of the line appears near here.
Hey, Bruce, one last thing on the Cubs before we switch over to the White Sox. About a week or so ago, it was Wilson Contreras after the game. In fact, it was a week ago last night. Contreras went after his teammates. He all but called them quitters going into the All-Star break. But then it's funny, you mentioned the whole Yu Darvish thing. If you're really going to go after your teammates, why not go after your owner or your hierarchy who gave away your best pitcher for, like you said, next to nothing? And that sort of set the tone for the season that this team was not serious about winning.
Yeah, I would like to see that myself. And, maybe it'll come out in the end where somebody does say that. But, yeah, everything to me, and I always kept a log of daily starting pitching, everything plays off your starting pitching. And when you get rid of a guy like that, who had his ups and downs early with the Cubs, but then who showed really the quality pitcher he is, when you take that out of your rotation and replace it with what you replaced it with, you're just asking for trouble. When your starters are going 4, 5, and 6 innings, and remember all that talk early in the year about how great their bullpen was, you cannot continue to keep putting that stress on your bullpen, running those same guys out day in and day out and expect those guys to have the same kind of success that they had early on. So to me, it all starts with that. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I would love to hear somebody call out and say, we're doing our part here. How about some help from the top?
Davies pitched today. He walked the ballpark. I don't know he had bad stuff, but boy, he was not only wild, he was very, very, very wild. And part of that deal was they had to get rid of Caratini. You think they could use Caratini right now?
Yeah, in fact, he was, as you know, Yu Darvish's personal catcher, but certainly after how many backup catchers have they run through this year? 6 or 8 guys that you've never heard of, or you looked at and said, oh, this guy's still in the big leagues? So, yeah, of course they could. Victor was, I think, the perfect backup to Wilson Contreras, also had the good relationship with Yu Darvish, which is still bearing fruit in San Diego. But, yeah, there were some curious moves made there, and like I said, I don't blame Cubs fans for being skeptical, for being cynical. And I'm sure that players in that clubhouse are going, the ones who are still going to be there are saying, what are we doing here?
One last thing before David switches back over to the Sox. If anybody saw the way that game, once again, they were rallying. And once again, it looked like maybe Soria was going to blow that game in the 9th inning. The third strike that was called that it was called a strike right down the middle, and you ended up seeing an argument briefly there at the end of that thing from Contreras. That was right down the middle. That was right down State Street. That was definitely a strike.
Well, I did see the game. I did see the last inning there. And the only thing I can think of there, he was looking for one thing. He was looking for the express and maybe got the local, was not ready for it. But in that situation with 2 strikes, you got to be ready, shorten up a little bit. But, yeah, I think he argued just to make it look good there. No doubt about it, that pitch was a strike. Unfortunately for him and the Cubs, I think he was looking one way and got caught the other.
Hey, Bruce, you mentioned pitching, starting pitching specifically, where the Cubs have next to nothing. The White Sox are just loaded with riches in their starting staff. That's why, more than any other reason, and Tim Anderson is probably their MVP on top of everything else, but that's why they're 20 games over 500. They had 2 big wins the last 2 days against Houston, and it's good to beat anybody, but finally the White Sox might have shut up a few people for a while by beating a good team, because they had really fattened up on their division and some of the other also-rans. But in Houston, you beat a really good team the last couple of days. Bottom line is the White Sox have pitching. And the year that they won it all in 2005, their starting staff was real strong. I'm not saying they're going to win the whole thing again, although they're at least a possibility. But maybe you can talk about the value of having 1 through 5 guys that you can count on day in and day out.
And to be able to have, like, you're a card player and you got Michael Kopech in your hand here, and you only play him when you need to play him, I think is a tremendous luxury. And again, you got to be good. You got to be lucky. Non-tendering Rodon, getting him back. He pitches a no-hit. He was absolutely dominant today. And like I said, it proves my point again. Everything plays off your starting pitching. If they're going 6 and 7 deep every game, chances are you're going to win. And let's do something here. Been around. You guys covered Tony La Russa more as a Sox manager than I did. I saw him. I came into baseball writing when he was with Oakland. I wasn't exactly head over heels thrilled when the Sox rehired him this past winter. I thought he was maybe out of touch with the game, wouldn't relate to the younger players. Remember that whole contretemps earlier in the year with Yermin Mercedes when Tony got after him about swinging 3-0 and hitting a home run. Everybody thought, oh, my God, see, that proves the point. But Tony looks like he's having a good time. He looks like he's relating to these players, and it seems he's pushing the right buttons. How many injuries have they had, like Grandal, Robert, Eloy Jimenez, Nick Madrigal, and the guys they've brought up, credit to the system, Vaughn and Sheets and these guys they've plugged in. But I just think that, yes, it all starts with your starting pitching. And I think that begrudgingly, tip of the old hat here to Tony La Russa.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bruce. Listen, the bottom line is the results in the standings. So right now, as much as people wanted to get it all over his case early on, and he made some mistakes, even the day that he blew the rule and not knowing what's going on. However, 20 games over 500, they're running away with their division. We're not in the clubhouse anymore. Hopefully that'll resume someday. That's a whole nother.
That'll never change. I think they're making it permanently, but I'm skeptical about that. But
well, that remains to be seen.
I think you got a point there, Les. Maybe that's a story for another day, but I think you got a point.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he might be right, of course. But what I'm trying to say is there seems to be a camaraderie, and you can even feel it as a reporter from afar. And I think Tony La Russa has something to do with that. Again, there is camaraderie when you're 20 games over 500 and you're winning on a day-by-day basis. But, he's got to get some kind of credit for that. Bruce, let me ask you the same question I posed to Les right off the bat. There's still 75 games to go, so there's a long time, and they'll have a chance to set their rotation if they run away and win this division like they're currently doing. Who's your game one pitcher?
Yeah, man, you know what? That's a nice problem to have, isn't it? Do you go with the experience of a Dallas Keuchel? Do you go with Rodon, who's been lights out this year? I think that might be my first choice to go with Carlos there. I think what you do is if you get in, if you clinch early, which it appears that they might do given their division, given how they play, you set it up, you scout your opponents and say, we're going to play X and such team. They have a left-handed hitting lineup, a right-handed hitting lineup. What do we want to do to set our rotation to face that lineup and especially give us that game one edge, which is so important, I think, in the baseball playoffs. But I think it's a nice problem that Tony La Russa has. They'll put their heads together on that. But, man, I don't think you can go wrong in any way.
No, they're pretty solid 1 through 5. And I only brought up maybe Lance Lynn because he's the veteran presence and La Russa's used to him, not only here but in St. Louis previous. And you just don't know if Rodon, he's been fantastic. I mean, he has been fantastic. He's the comeback player of the year. You can give him the award right now. But you don't know if his arm is going to hold up another 75, 80, 90, 100 innings only because he hasn't pitched that much over the last couple of years. And you worry that maybe he might not be as strong in October as he is currently in July or maybe even in August. That's the only thing I'm bringing up as a possible negative against him.
And I think you get into some man management there where the Rick Hahn and Tony La Russa and the pitching coach will say, okay, do we need to back off a guy? Do we need to back off a guy like Rodon in September, limit his starts to 5 innings, whatever it might be, maybe go to a 6-man for 1 or 2 turns through the rotation? I think those are all things that are down the road and that they'll look at. But yeah, I think man management is going to be key down the stretch, especially if the Sox go into September and they're up by, again, like they are now, 8-9 games or even double digits. You have that luxury where you can rest guys. Who knows what trades they're going to make. I got to believe that by the 30th of July here, they're going to bolster that roster in some way, shape, or form. They have enough to deal. They have strength from which to deal and the holes to fill, but also getting guys back from injury. It's like almost making a trade where you can get a Grandal back or an Eloy Jimenez or a Louis Robert back. That's like making a trade. And in this case, having to give up nothing. And then in the meantime, you've given youngsters big league experience in a pennant race. So I think they have a lot going for them there. But, those are things for Rick Hahn and his front office and Tony La Russa to sort out. But I think man management's going to be the key here.
Who's the real boss here? I mean, people felt from the beginning La Russa was not Rick Hahn's choice, that was a Jerry Reinsdorf hire. If it was, great. It's making Jerry look good, and it's quieting a lot of people down. But in your opinion, who has the final say on things? Is it Rick Hahn or is it Tony La Russa? Because it can't be both.
Oh, I think it has to be a collaborative issue. Oh, I sound like the Bears, don't I? Collaborative. I'm sorry. I sound like the Bears. But I think it's really, I think Rick Hahn, the buck stops with him. And I think that there's a mutual respect there. I haven't been around the team a lot to know this, but I think there's a mutual respect between Tony and Rick. Rick Hahn is the general manager. He'll make the call with significant input from Tony La Russa. I think that there's been respect gained on both sides this year from what Rick and his front office have been able to provide to Tony in the wake of the injuries and for the job Tony has done, the hiccups notwithstanding in the dugout. So I really do think that relationship, and we've all seen it between manager, general manager, or in other sports, general manager and coach, is so sacred and so important that I think that in the end they'll be on the same page and make that decision. But Rick, the buck stops there.
Hey, Bruce,
as far as the 2 Central divisions, the American League Central, other than the White Sox, is weak. Pitching is a complete train wreck for the Cleveland Indians. Even when Bieber comes back, it'll help them a little bit. But if they had a good rotation going, they'd probably be right up there. But otherwise, they don't. And then if you take a look at the National League Central, it's the Brewers and even Cincinnati. Cincinnati beat them in Milwaukee last week, and the Brewers returned the favor this time around. And we know that teams like the Cardinals and the Cubs, they're basically not contenders; they're pretenders.
Well, yeah, and you look at next weekend, the White Sox are going to be going to Milwaukee, and in fact, they've got a Sunday night matchup. When was the last time you've seen that? A White Sox-Milwaukee game on a Sunday night baseball. So, a lot of people might say that's a World Series matchup. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Chicago and Milwaukee, 90 miles apart in a World Series. Again, a lot to go through before that. But I think that's a wonderful test again for the White Sox, as Houston was this weekend. I think it was a big psychological lift for the White Sox to win these last couple of games against the Astros. They're going to face some tough pitching in Milwaukee again next weekend. I just think that might be like the old days of the Sox going up and their fans to County Stadium and, breaking loose in the stands there. But be a big test and a lot of fun, I think.
Oh, my God. You're taking me back to my high school days when we used to ditch school and go up and watch Brewer White Sox, and we'd sit in the right field corner there.
Absolutely.
And basically be derogatory towards some of the players. But, you mentioned, I got to go back to something you mentioned about the Bears. You just sort of slipped that in about collaborative. What do you think about the stories potentially? And Les and I have talked about this a lot. Them moving out of the city to closer to your neck of the woods. You want them as your neighbors up in Arlington Heights?
I think so. I think it would be a boon for the Northwest suburbs. Listen, I'm old enough to remember when that talk was going on in the early and mid 70s, and people said, it'll never happen. And it never did, of course. But yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I have no insight, but I think that there's an appetite for it in the suburbs. Soldier Field is just so hard to get to for anybody with parking, with you name it. The place was outdated as soon as they reopened the spaceship on top of the columns and all that. The seating capacity isn't that great. There's enough clout, I think, in the suburbs. I think that there's statewide approval. I think that there's inter-suburban cooperation among the suburbs, Schaumburg, Arlington Heights, Rolling Meadows, Mount Prospect, all of those out here. The Metro train line stops right at Arlington Park. So, again, I have no idea what's going to happen, but I think it's got a better chance now than it's ever had.
The problem is 53 is a way you want to get up to where Arlington Park is currently and that would be great, but traffic is going to be backed up on that thing. And people say, what about the tollway? Well, you got to take the tollway, then you got to take 53. And taking Euclid or Lake Avenue, it's the same street, that's going to be backed up. I don't think it's going to be quite as easy as you think. Plus the fact there are other bidders right now that want to keep the racetrack going that not necessarily want to see a Bears stadium built. So I don't think it's as Lee Corso always says on his TV deal, not so fast.
No, not so fast is right, Les. I think there are a million hurdles to overcome before you get that. I've lived up here for 52 years, 53 Ucayali Streets, Wilkie Road. I think it's a potential mess if you're going to get 70,000 Bears fans trying to drive on a Sunday on all these streets here. You might as well park in my backyard in Schaumburg and take a shuttle bus. I'd be glad to charge you $50.
That's not that far away either.
So, yeah, I think that that's a million miles away yet. But again, I think there's more appetite for it. There's more momentum. And, hey, if it spurs the city of Chicago into doing something better for the Bears, then everybody's a winner. But, my gosh, not a shovel has been turned in the ground. So ways to go yet.
Hey, Bruce, Les will laugh at what I'm about to say, but you could turn your backyard into what they do at Lambeau Field. They open up their yards right by the field, $5, $10, $30, $50, $100 to park. You'll give up your sod on your grass if you can get $100 a car, wouldn't you?
Oh, sure. And I'll even start the grill and they can tailgate here if they want. So sure, why not? But yeah, it's fun to think about. I know the paper that I used to work for, the Daily Herald, has run a million articles about it because, that's right in their backyard. And, again, remains to be seen. But, I think there's traction this time and, we'll see.
Hey, they were going to come to Elk Grove Village. Tom Johnson, the mayor of Elk Grove Village, who I know very well, he showed me the area around Bussey Woods that they had set aside for the Bears in the past. That was actually a possibility. And we know that ultimately they decided to keep the team in the city. And one last point. I don't care what Mayor Lightfoot says, and I don't care what the late Richard J. Daley, the older guy, used to say. Well, they could go to Gary or whatever, but they can't use the name Chicago. They can't stop that. They're always going to be the Chicago Bears, and Mayor Lightfoot and anybody else cannot prevent that. What are they going to call them? The Northwest Suburb Bears? That's not going to happen. They're going to be the Chicago Bears, just like the New York Giants. They play in the Meadowlands in New Jersey. They're still the New York Giants and the New York Jets.
And the Los Angeles Angels play in Anaheim. So I think that's a lot of silliness. That's a lot of posturing. Of course, they're going to be the Chicago Bears, no matter where they play, even if it was Gary a few years ago when that whole thing was being floated.
That was never going to happen.
No, of course not.
Hey, Bruce, before we get to our segments here that we do each and every week, our Walk Down Memory Lane segment, and I'm sure you'll be amused by that, and also Stump the Grobber, and we have special Cub questions because I want you to be part of this as well. I just wanted to ask you one last thing. I mean, again, you and I have stood pretty much shoulder to shoulder in clubhouses and dugouts and on the field over all the years, and we've dealt with all kinds of personalities, some that are pleasant, some that are quite the contrary, some that are colorful. If I asked you to name just a few personalities that are either nice or not nice or colorful over all the years, who stood out to you?
It's a funny thing. One of my favorite Cubs teams to have covered was one that didn't win anything. That was the 2001 Cubs. They were in first place for 4 months. They brought in guys like Ron Coomer, who we all know very well, Matt Stairs. They had guys like Eric Young, Ricky Gutierrez. Those were all go-to guys. That was a really fun. I remember one time Matt Stairs in Pittsburgh was walking around in the clubhouse with nothing on but a jock strap and a stocking cap going to the hitting cages. He did that just to loosen up the clubhouse. And he would say, as the clubhouse was closing, unless you got a uniform on, you can get the bleep out of here. And he was just kind of toying with us. But I think that club to me was a favorite. But over the years, I think, and you'll agree with this too, gentlemen, more good guys than bad. We mentioned Milton Bradley earlier, what a nightmare that was. But, even guys who were, to use the old baseball term, red ass, a guy like John Lester, he was that. But boy, if you get him one-on-one and you ask him a question, he had thoughts. Kerry Wood had thoughts about winning, about playing good baseball. Guys over the years like Mark Grace and Kevin Tapani, and guys like I mentioned, like Eric
Mark
Young.
Grace is one of the best, absolutely one of the best.
So yeah, I think more good than bad, but just those kind of guys that I really enjoyed. Rod Beck was on the first year that I joined the Cubs as a beat writer was 98. So Rod Beck is in spring training, and I said, Rod, a lot of people have made an issue about your weight. What do you think about that? And he looks at me and said, you ever seen anybody go on the DL with pulled fat? So, right off the bat, old character guys like that.
Everybody liked Shooter. I don't know anybody that didn't like Shooter as a person.
Yeah, and even to this day, I enjoyed my relationships with people like Chris Bryant and Jason Hayward and Anthony Rizzo, guys, veteran guys who had thoughts about the game. So I miss Kyle Schwarber a lot. I think he was one of the most accessible guys, quintessential mid-American guy who always was available. So more good than bad. I think I can count on one hand the unpleasant guys or the guys that I didn't like dealing with. And frankly, I stayed away from them.
You weren't there in 78, were you, Bruce?
No, I was not. That was before my time.
That was a terrible team.
That team was miserable with Barry Foote and people like that. And they were. I could go on and on and on, but it was just a rotten team to cover. While the White Sox at the other end of town was such a wonderful team to cover.
It's really interesting, Les, that you mentioned that team. I don't remember 78, but 79 when I first broke in, and there were really some rotten guys on that team, including, of course, Dave Kingman. And Dick Tidrow, God rest his soul, he just passed away a couple of days ago. He was on that team. And as a player, maybe it was just the times back then in the late 70s, and Herman Franks was the manager, so he set the tone of being a rotten person. But, Dick Tidrow as a player was not a pleasant person to deal with. However, he became a very important scout and a front office person for a lot of organizations, and it was integral. In fact, I think he was a big part of the white flag trade, getting the White Sox, some players and yada, yada, yada.
Keith Hulk and Bobby Howery.
That's right. Anyway, what I'm trying to get around to is as a player, he was not a pleasant person, but later on, he would sit up in the press box with us. He was the most pleasant person, and you could really glean a lot. When you sit with scouts, and Bruce knows this as well, over the years, that's where you really find out what's going on in the game. And Dick Tidrow, like Jim Fregosi, God rest his soul as well, those were two guys that you could really just sit and shut your mouth and listen to these guys and learn about the sport.
That was the interesting thing, and somebody asked on the crawl here what was the most interesting jersey. You remember my jersey game? I'd spot obscure jerseys. I might have seen a Tidrow or two, a 41 Tidrow. I saw a 22 Popovich a couple of years ago as well, so that might be. But the point you made, I used to travel with the team, and I would see guys like Jim Fregosi, at breakfast or whatever. Those guys were fountains of knowledge. They would tell you things, of course, off the record. They didn't want to be quoted, but they helped you in your coverage because they would say, watch this or watch this guy. Or this guy can play. This guy can't play. This guy will play. This guy won't play. And like you said, some of those guys might have been hard to deal with. I'm not going to say any bad words as players or managers. But when you got them away from the game, it was just you respected their knowledge.
Were you on the trip to Tokyo in 2000?
Yes, I was. And
I was too. After the second game, they should have won that game too. They just missed out, but they split with the Mets. The next morning, and my flight was delayed. I got my flight changed too, so I got an extra couple of days. So I got to go to Tokyo Disney. I was at breakfast the next morning on the top of the hotel, and they had what we called a Western breakfast. I had finished, and all of a sudden I get a call from across the room. Hey, come on over here. And I spoke with this guy for a good hour, talked about everything but baseball. It was Ernie Banks.
How about that? No, that was a trip of a lifetime. And I'll never forget that, and I'm forever grateful to the Daily Herald for sending me. Not a cheap trip, but it was just an educational experience, culturally, so forth and so on. Being in a country and being a foreigner where English for a lot of people just was not existent, trying to order food or whatever. So yeah, that trip was a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, people have asked me, again on the crawl here, what was like guys like Joe Borowski like. Joe was like this down-to-earth New Jersey guy from Bayonne. Well, the Cubs, he had a great year with the Cubs, and they signed him to an extension. And so I called Jim Hendry, and I said, well, can I talk to Joe? He goes, he's sitting right next to me on the bus, on the caravan going to Peoria. Here's the phone. And Joe was like, oh, yeah, thrill of a lifetime or whatever. So it was, stories like that. I think covering baseball, and you guys will agree, personal relationships are the best part, whether the stuff makes it onto your broadcast or into my stories or not.
Bruce, it's funny that you mentioned Henry a couple of times now, and you also mentioned earlier about, they would tell you things, but they'd be off the record. Jim Hendry, if I could ever attribute a couple of words to him, he used to always go, guys, off the record. It was so, he told us so much stuff off the record. It was comical that he would almost do that on a daily basis.
And the mutual respect there was that he trusted us not to use it. So right. He would continue to tell us stuff. And, people, maybe not understand the job of a reporter. They're telling you that so that they're setting you straight so that you don't go off half-cock reporting some idiotic rumor or some deal that appears imminent that's not really. So I really appreciated people like Jim and others for doing that, saying, okay, look, off the record, we're not doing this. So right. You didn't report it. So there was, I think, that mutual respect.
Yeah. All right. Before we get to Stump the Grobber and along with Bruce, I want to just real quickly, and it's so ironic. I wrote this down a couple of days ago, walk down memory lane segment, and you've already mentioned not once, but a couple of times, Milton Bradley. And that's my walk down memory lane segment. And this is even before Bradley came to the Cubs. And Bruce, I think you were out there, unless I think you were out. No, actually, I don't know if you were out there, Les. This was the 2008 playoffs. This is when the Cubs and the White Sox were both eliminated in the span of about 18 hours.
I wasn't in L.A., but I was at I went up to Milwaukee for their game against the Phillies in the playoffs while the Cubs were out in L.A. about to get eliminated.
All right, so, the Cubs lost that series in 3 games to the Dodgers. They were outscored 20-6. They were just manhandled. And I remember after Game 3 in Los Angeles, the questions came up to Lou Piniella in that little office, and the clubhouse, the visiting clubhouse, was not refurbished at that point like it has been since. And Piniella kept saying, we need a left-handed hitter. We need a left-handed hitter. And basically, it was right then and there that the Cubs the wheels were put in motion to get, and Bradley was a switch hitter, but they needed somebody from the left-handed side. So Milton Bradley basically, almost from that moment when they were eliminated that night, Bradley was on the radar, and I think Jim Hendry was sort of talked into signing him, like you alluded to.
Piniella wanted no part of that guy.
Well, but they signed him. And to Hendry's credit, he got rid of him also after some terrible stuff happened, like you guys said. There was a terrible verbal altercation between Piniella and Bradley somewhere about 50, 60 games into the season. And, Bradley accused the Cub fans of being racist. And
I wrote that story.
Okay. Everything else that went along. He was a miserable. You don't want to badmouth anybody, but you can badmouth Milton Bradley. Listen, he's done some horrible things in his life. He was a terrible person to be around.
Well, I got him suspended. I was going to say I got along with him okay, because when I would go in the locker room, I would wait till all you beat writers are out, and I talked to him about stuff other than baseball, and he was fine. But if you wanted to talk baseball with him, David is right. He was miserable.
Well, I wrote this story in September in St. Louis that got him suspended. I was looking for one guy. I was leaving the clubhouse. I was the last guy left, and I asked Milton about his stay in Chicago. He went off on the organization. He went off on the fans. It was a big exclusive, and the next day, Jim Hendry suspended him, for the rest of the season. Then they traded him to Seattle for Carlos Silva. But it was a complete nightmare, and it was really spelled the beginning of the end for the Hendry era. But yeah, you're right. I think that dates back to, as you said, David, in Dodger Stadium, where Lou was in that little office saying, look, what am I going to do here? I need a left-hand hitter. Where am I going to get a left-hand hitter? I would see Lou in the concourse after games, and he would call me over and say, one day, what am I going to do with all these right-hand hitters? And the next hit, what am I going to do with all these left-hand hitters? So you never knew. But, it was and people don't realize this, but a couple of years even before that, Dusty Baker went to talk with Milton Bradley when Dusty was the Cubs manager, just to feel him out to see if, Dusty could handle him. So Milton's reputation was well known in those days, but the Cubs, even a couple of years before they signed him, were actually talking about trading for him.
Yeah, well, he, during his, I won't call it illustrious career, quite the opposite. Only 8, he played for 8 different teams over like a 10 or 11 year span. So that told you all you really needed to know about Milton Bradley. He was just a miserable person.
Yes, and on the other hand, I remember the Cubs had Edwin Jackson, played for about 25 teams, but he was a nice guy.
Yeah, he was.
Edwin Jackson was really a nice guy. But yeah, those things can kind of work both ways. We know why Milton Bradley played for all those teams, and Jackson. Everybody's looking for the magic elixir. Maybe we can fix this guy. So anyway, that's about the long and the short of that.
Go ahead, Les.
I was going to say with regard to some of these other goofballs there and all. Again, I remember when Jim Hendry was still there, and I got along great with him. We never had a cross word, and very few reporters did because he was a nice guy. But when he, what was the name of that relief pitcher they picked up? They let Kerry Wood go at the same time that they let DeRosa go, and they picked up the guy who had led the major leagues in giving up home runs. He had been with the Marlins, then he came to the Cubs, and then he was brought back by the current regime as well. I'm trying to remember the relief pitcher.
Oh, and gosh. That's a stump the grabber right there. You stumped yourself, Les.
And I said to Jim Hendry, why are you bringing this guy in here when he led the major leagues in giving up home runs? And
Kevin Gregg.
Yeah,
Kevin Gregg.
He was terrible. Nice guy, but he couldn't get me out. And Jim Hendry goes like this to me, get out of my way. And he walked away right at the Cub convention.
Right, and then Kevin Gregg is a guy who had to come up to the press box one day and apologize for remarks he made in the clubhouse. It was the only time I've ever seen that in all my years of covering sports, where they marched him up to the press box to apologize for some incendiary remarks he made after a game. But, that's the guy.
Yeah, they let Kerry Wood go, and they brought in Gregg, and I'm thinking, what are they doing? And we knew that team in 2009 was going to be bad, and they were.
It was a good job by Piniella managing that team, because they were in first place until August the 4th, and then Carlos Zambrano decided to take himself out of a start with about 10 minutes before the game in Colorado. They had to rush and get Sean Marshall ready, and that was the beginning of the end. But, poor Lou that season with all of that and Milton Bradley going on.
Was there ever a better sound bite than Zambrano made? And this was after Theo and the rest were here, when he said, "We stinks." When he made that comment, they were not amused, and he was released probably within a week or two.
Yeah, he was. He basically left the team in Atlanta in 2011, and Jim Hendry had already been informed he was going to be fired. And Theo and Jed traded him that offseason. He never pitched for the current regime. They traded him to Florida for Chris Volstad and what have you there. But no, that was the beginning of the end. And Jim had signed him to the long-term contract and really admitted mistake. Here's the thing about Carlos Zambrano. Not a bad guy. He just did a lot of knuckleheaded stuff, but a good heart, built churches, gave to charities. He came up to the press box once just to see our working conditions and just to visit with us.
And he could swing the bat too.
Oh boy, could he ever! But it's a good at Gatorade jugs too. But a good guy who did knuckleheaded things. I'll put it that way, because I liked him.
Oh, he had a great relationship with Michael Barrett, didn't he?
Oh boy!
Oh, wow. Kind of like AJ did.
Yeah. By the way, a good friend of all of ours, Dave Wills, Bump Wills, just said hello to all of us on here. Good to see and hear from Dave. But before we get out of here, guys, we always have to do this. So let's get ready to do our famous segment, Stump the Grobber.
What was that?
That doesn't really make sense.
What?
Live and let live.
I'm not familiar with that
It's
expression.
the James Bond.
It doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
Of course, I'm alive.
Queens on casino night. I am going to drop a deuce on everybody.
I just want to say for the record, I did not kill anyone. Stanley was attacked by his own heart.
I know where this is going.
Do you? Okay. It's now time for Stump the Grobber on the Grobstein and Schuster Express.
And time again, once again, for Stump the Grobber, along with Bruce Miles and Les Grobstein. And Les, I tailored all these questions to be Cub questions today because Bruce is going to be on. So let's let Bruce take first stab. And I got a feeling he's going to know all of these. Maybe one.
Probably will. By the way, speaking of Dave Wills, his Tampa Bay Rays, they beat a good team, the Atlanta Braves, today, 7-5. Congratulations to Bump Wills and the Rays.
Tampa Bay is city of champions right now. That's all I know. I mean, everywhere you look, there are winning teams down there. But anyway, all right, let's start with Cub questions. Bruce, you get first crack. If Les is not, if you're not able to do it, Les can chime in. I got a feeling you're going to know all these. 1921, 1951, 30-year span. Where did the Cubs hold their spring training games?
Catalina Island.
That is absolutely correct. Catalina Island off the coast of California. The reason being is that William Wrigley had a mansion out in that area. He didn't want to
own the thing.
What's that, Les? What'd you say, Les?
He owned the island, literally.
Probably owned the island. So
I think that Wrigley did, yeah.
Yeah. Catalina Island is absolutely correct. All right, next question. 1932 World Series, Babe Ruth with the calling the shot home run. Who was the Cubs pitcher?
Charlie Root.
That is correct again. Charlie Root is the answer. That's a famous trivia question. All right. 1961, college coaches. The Cubs had 9. Oh, excuse me. I just gave away the answer. How many?
What a bunch of embarrassment that was.
Yeah. How many managers did the Cubs have that year? I gave the answer away by saying it.
Yeah, I remember guys like Charlie Metro and Luke Klein and Alvin Tappy and Vidi Himzel, and Les can probably fill in the rest of them, but what a disaster.
Did you mention Charlie Metro?
He was the first guy I mentioned, yes.
Yeah, Luke Klein, and they were all there, and the next Cub manager after that was a guy named Leo DeRocher.
That is correct. And I think you can probably say that that's why they made the mistake of trading Lou Brock in '64, in that he never really got a consistent voice to help him become the player that he did become with the St. Louis Cardinals.
I argue with people on the air all the time about that I say that is the worst trade in baseball history. Oh, no, it had to be Babe Ruth. No, that wasn't a trade. That was a sale, because the owner of the Red Sox, he needed money for his play Nuno Nanette. That's why he needed all that money, and that's why he sent Babe Ruth to the Yankees.
So in 1961, when they had the college coaches, or whatever you want to call them, rotation, there were 9 different Cub managers that season. 9. All right, let's go further. First Cubs pitcher to win the Cy Young Award, Bruce. Who was it?
Oh, wow. I'm going to say Fergie Jenkins.
Absolutely correct. He was the first. The Cubs have had 4 pitchers to win the Cy, and Fergie was the very first one.
Another part of that question, who was the other pitcher in the majors who was mad when Fergie got the award? He says, I was better than him. I should have got the award. Who was it, Bruce?
Was it Gibson?
No.
Okay, no, I don't know that one, Les.
Tom Seaver.
Okay.
Tom Seaver could be an up and down personality also, by the way. But
he'd be mostly down.
Yeah, God rest his soul. He was one of the greats. All right, let's see. How about this one? When the Cubs traded Giovanni Soto to Texas, who did they get in return?
You stumped me. Maybe Grobber can get that one.
You got me on that one, too.
It's a pitcher, and honestly, guys, I don't remember him. Jack Brigham.
Wow.
You totally got me on that one.
Or Jake Brigham. Jake or Jack, I don't know. Whoever he was, I don't remember him. To be honest,
it wasn't Jock Peterson, huh?
Was Brigham young?
Yeah, he might have been old for all I know. I'm not really sure. All right, let's see here. Now, here's a tough one, and I'm going to be honest with you. This one I came across. I never heard this one. What group recorded the song Here Come the Cubs?
You got me there.
It's a very famous group.
I got no clue.
The Beach Boys.
Okay.
They did do it. They did do their own version of it. That is correct.
Not one of their hits, but they did it. All right, let's see.
That became a WGN song. They used it as part of their thing.
Okay. All right. What player in 1991, Cubs player, sang the national anthem on opening day?
Dwight Smith?
That is correct.
Okay.
And you'll know the other question. Who played the trumpet for the national anthem?
Herman Fanzone.
Also correct.
He caught the last out of Pappas's no-hitter, which should have been a perfect game in 72. At that point, Fanzone was playing second base, and he caught a pop-up to end the game.
Absolutely.
All right, here's the last one. The Cubs, of course, traded Bruce Sutter, who, by the way, 71, Jenkins won the
Leon Durham.
Hold on. You know, if you were on Jeopardy, you get buzzed for being wrong, by the way. The Cubs traded Bruce Sutter. Sutter won the Cy Young the year after Jenkins. Jenkins won in 71. Sutter won in 72. But when they traded Sutter to St. Louis, they got 3 players less in return. Who were the 3?
The major one, though, was without question Leon Durham.
Okay.
Ken Reitz might have been one of them.
That's 2 of them.
He was washed up by that time.
Yes, he was. Who was the 3rd player?
You got me there.
Ty Waller.
Oh, Ty Doggy.
Ty Doggy.
I didn't give him that nickname. That nickname was given to my other people.
Here's Jeff Dandyman asking Dave Wills an answer to a question. I think Dave has left the building here right now. So I don't know.
Randy Rosarima, who was a good player.
Yes. Oh my God. Let's see. Have you ever noticed what, Jeff? I'm not really sure what you're asking.
I think he was asking why there was a space between the guy's name.
Oh,
there it is. There between the letters on the back of his jersey.
Okay.
Why that is. That's pretty obscure. And I'm the Jersey guy.
Okay. Don't really know that one. Hey, Les, any final thoughts or questions to Bruce? And Bruce, we appreciate you joining us. Love reading all your stuff. I miss you, Bruce, because you know what? You're one of the guys that used to, I sidle up to, in the clubhouse and in the press box, got along with you over all these years. I miss seeing you at the ballpark. You know what? I don't miss the grind, but here's what I miss. I miss being around guys like you two because of your knowledge of Chicago sports. It's almost encyclopedic. It is in the case of Les, and I mean that with all respect, but just the fact that you can commiserate about the job, you could, did you hear they're going to go after this guy? Nah, they're not going to do that. And whenever I went on the radio with you guys, it wasn't a scream fest. You guys were always the voice of reason. And of course, Les, you never presented inaccurate information. If something happened in 1972 and you said it did, then you're going to the bank on that. But that's the part of me. I don't miss the grind. I don't miss the commute, but I do miss seeing all the people in the press box and in the clubhouse and just kind of swapping stories. Tom Garcia says, Bruce, always loved your work and look forward to reading more on your site. And well, I'm writing for guys like that. So, and I'll keep you guys posted on when and if more things are coming along. I got a special one coming this week, which I'll keep under this hat right now, but I got a special interview coming up. So we'll look forward to that. If you're ever up at midnight one night, I got to get you to open our show one night. Oh, man, I'm old. Midnight, I'm in bed 3 hours by then. But if I'm up, if I get insomnia, I'll call in. And Dave Wills, by the way, was still here, and he was still answering the questions. Dave, good talking to you. Les and I invite you to come on one of these upcoming Sundays to be on with both Les and myself. And we can even talk about some of our old Chicago radio all-star games, of which... Why was he a great power hitter for our team? God, that right fielder was never far enough back because he would park it over that right fielder's head almost every time. No, the right fielder got a stiff neck watching balls fly over his head. And going back even further, Les and I worked along Dave Wills with the Chicago Bruisers of Arena Football in 1988. Les and Emery Moorhead did the radio. I did the reporting for the Daily Herald, and Dave and Mike McGraw, the Daily Herald's Bulls writer, were there as the media relations representative. So that's how far we go back. That's 1988. Dave Wills with the Bruisers, Les on the radio, and me on the newspaper. Yeah, we did that. We got to go to the great arenas that year. We went to Madison Square Garden. We got to do the LA Sports Arena for the LA Cobras, who, by the way, had Cliff Branch on their team. Yeah, absolutely. Cliff Branch, my God. All right, Dave Will says that he'll come on with us anytime. Dave, I'm going to be in contact with you. We'll hopefully do it maybe in the next week or two, if that's okay with you. So, Bruce, again, love the Bruiser, says Dave Will. So did I. I loved working with Emery Moorhead. I mean, what a great guy he is, too. Still a good friend today. Yeah. Hey, Bruce, again, appreciate you joining us today. I had a lot of fun with this. Always my pleasure, guys. Thanks so much. Okay. And Les, I will talk to you shortly. And everybody, have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next Sunday.